In this video, I'm going to go over every single framework I use at my disposal to overcome burnout. My name is Mateo. I travel the world and I teach salespeople, but it's worth noting that I do not make the bulk of my money at the time of this recording from actually teaching salespeople. I make the bulk of my recording from doing sales itself. I know, what a crazy thing. A coach that makes their money doing the thing that they're coaching. I know. Anyways, I make these videos because I hope that you can glean from them something that will save you some sort of unnecessary suffering that I had to go through. In this case, it's the feeling of burnout. The last time that I felt burnout was I was working crazy hours. I was working from 6:30 a.m. to 8 or 9, sometimes even later into the night. And I was doing that 5 days a week. And then on the 6th day, I would work like a half day. The funny part about this is when I started doing that, I was actually gaining energy from the work that I was doing. I went to bed happy at night. I felt like the things I was doing were contributing something, and I actually gained energy from the work that I was doing. Now, at some point, this shifted and I stopped gaining energy. The things that used to give me energy in the work that I was doing were now draining me of energy. So I didn't recognize it at the time. This took me 6 months, 7, 8, 9 months later until I finally figured it out. But let's fast forward 4 months later from this time period. So I had come up with this crazy idea. The idea was I was going to run 50 miles in 50 days. In other words, I would give myself 50 days to prepare for a 50-mile ultramarathon. It was 50-50 because I thought it sounded cool. From this 50-mile ultramarathon, I learned a lot of lessons. And it wasn't until after doing this 50-mile ultramarathon, I started reflecting on the lessons I learned from the 50-mile ultramarathon that I was able to connect it with the feeling of burnout that I had felt a few months prior. So the very first thing that I learned from doing the 50-mile ultramarathon is something I call patient endurance. So patient endurance to me is setting the bar at a standard at which you can actually achieve what you set out to achieve for that day, and over a period of time that compounds. So here's what I mean by that. When I first set out to do the 50-mile ultramarathon, as you can probably tell, nobody looks at my body and thinks, oh, I bet he's an ultra athlete. I could hardly run a mile when I first started. Like it was a lot of work for me to run a mile. And I wasn't even running a full mile. Like the very first day of my training, I went outside and I ran, it's like 0.9 miles. I couldn't even run a full mile. But what I learned was through doing this daily and just adding a little bit incrementally every single day, I was very quickly able to get to the point where I could run 15 miles and then 20 miles. And then eventually run the 50-mile ultramarathon where I actually ended up doing an extra mile. So I ran 51 miles in total. Here's what I gleaned from this. So if you do not yet have the endurance to do the task at hand, you will not do the task at hand because you do not have the reference experiences necessary in order for your brain to believe that you can do the task at hand. What does that mean? A lot of people will put on their New Year's resolution calendar, tomorrow I'm gonna wake up and I'm gonna run 5 miles. The problem is if you never ran 5 miles before in your entire life, then you have absolutely no reference experiences for your brain to go off of to believe that you would actually do that thing. I think it's Jordan Peterson talks about putting the bar low enough. I believe he derived that from Nietzsche. I don't know, fact check me. But putting the bar low enough. And what does that mean in application? Well, it means what's the smallest task that you could do that you would do that would inch you one step further towards the goal that you're looking to achieve. And in this case, if you're wanting to run 5 miles, then don't set the New Year's resolution for you to run 5 miles the next day. Instead, set the New Year's resolution for tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to put on running shoes. The next day I will wake up, I will put on running shoes, and then I will walk to my door. The next day I will wake up, put on running shoes, walk to my door, and then maybe walk one time around my apartment complex or around my house or whatever your brain can manage that your brain actually believes that you would do. Because sometimes when we say things, there's that little voice in the back of our head that comes from the lack of reference experiences that our brain has as proof that tells us that we can't actually do the thing that we're saying that we want to do. And the problem is if you have that little voice in the back of your head, a lot of times that's an indicator that you can't do the thing that you're setting out to do, at least yet. Like you wouldn't walk into a gym, for example, and go for the heavy weights that the bodybuilder's lifting if it was your very first time ever stepping into a gym. And the problem is that due to this hurrah work 24/7, 7 days a week culture on Instagram right now, everybody attributes the same thing to work. They don't look at it like a muscle, they look at it like something that they're just going to step into and that they're just going to encourage themselves into. or they're just going to hype themselves into through watching enough motivational videos, and that will not work. Instead, if you have never worked an hour with complete focus in your entire life, and the most you've ever done before is perhaps 30 minutes, then maybe do 35 minutes the next day, because your brain could probably perceive going from 30 minutes to 35 minutes. In other words, incrementally add in the task. So the very first lesson that I learned is I started taking on too many responsibilities too quickly, and my brain did not believe that I could finish out those responsibilities in the correct manner. My brain did not see the gap from the reference experiences that I had previously to what I was trying to set out to do. It could not close that gap in time for me to actually do it, so it was leading my brain into great distress and therefore a feeling of burnout. That's number one reason why I felt burnt out. Second reason, and I remember during the time where I was feeling the burnout, there was a manager that I somewhat looked up to. He had been in the business a lot longer than me, and he started saying things. And the things he started saying were things like, "Hey, you look like you're feeling burnt out." And he was the very first person that ever told me that. He said things like, you're looking tired today, or you're looking burnt out. And this was all news to me because as far as I was concerned, I wasn't burnt out. I was gaining energy from the work that I was doing. I felt fantastic. But as he started to say these things, I let these things start to take root in my head, and I started to change the narratives in my head. Why is this? Well, generally speaking, the things in life that we want have energy expenditure on the front end and reward on the back end. But the thing that our mind wants to do is the thing that has reward on the front end with energy expenditure on the back end. For example, if I go out drinking with my buddies and I get super drunk, I get reward on the front end, but I get a hangover the next day. That's energy expenditure on the back end, negative energy expenditure on the back end. And the things that we want to do most of the time are the things with energy expenditure on the back or front end and the reward on the back end. Like I worked really, really hard and then I achieved this monetary gain. So the cognitive dissonance that I believe a lot of times we feel is fighting between what our brain wants, which is to spend as little effort to do an activity for a reward as possible, and what we know is best for us, which is to do the hardest thing for us to do, but in the long run, we'll glean a reward from it. And as a result, our brain will naturally go to the lowest energy expenditure frame that we allow it to go. Hopefully that made sense. So our brain will naturally go to that lower energy expenditure frame. And when he started saying these things to me, like, "Hey man, you're looking burnt out," and "Hey man, you look really tired today," because of the pain that I was already feeling from the tasks that I was doing, it was super easy to go from attributing the tasks that I was doing to a goal outcome that I had. In other words, the energy expenditure on the front end for the reward on the back end, versus I got the reward of feeling good about the way that I was feeling and feeling confirmed in the way that I was feeling, tired, some of the tasks being extremely hard on the front end. And unfortunately, that costed me energy on the back end. So the way that that looks like in practicality is you go from this experience of everything that you're doing gains you energy because the focus or the narrative that you have playing in your head is focused on the long-term result or the reward at the end of it, the carrot that's being dangled, instead of the pain that it takes in order to get there or the energy expenditure that it takes to get there. And as soon as that dynamic shifts, that's when you start to feel the burnout. So in my run, I was acutely aware for the very first time of all of my thoughts. And in the Bible, it talks about taking captive every thought. And this was the very first time in my life where I'd actually taken captive every single thought, because if I didn't take captive every single thought, I was not going to finish. And I learned the importance through doing this 50-mile ultramarathon of taking captive every single thought that comes into your head, because if you don't, then you start to play out the wrong narratives, because your brain is going to go to the narrative that is the easiest narrative to play, i.e. the narrative that gets a reward on the front end but costs you energy on the back end. So that's point number 2. Point number 3 is once he was speaking to me, it wasn't until I actually went and spoke those words out loud that they became rooted. Here's what I mean by that. So it wasn't until later on when I was running the 50-mile ultramarathon that I was able to look back at that moment with this manager at the time and realize it for what it was. And the moment in the ultramarathon that made me think of this was I was running it with a really good friend of mine, and we had promised before the race that throughout the entirety of the race, we were both going to talk to each other throughout the race. We were going to keep conversation going, keep our minds active. And that worked really well up until about mile 30. About mile 30 on, the last 20 miles of the race, we got really silent, real quiet. And I often thought about saying something like, I'm hurting a lot, or just wanting to express to another human being how much agony and pain that I was in. But for the very first time in my life, I didn't. And the reason I didn't is because I knew that he was right there beside me, feeling the exact same pain that I was feeling, and that speaking it out loud would do no good for either of us, and that it wasn't worth the energy expenditure on my end at that moment to say it out loud, because he already knew exactly what I was feeling, because he was feeling the exact same thing. Throughout the entire race, there was multiple times where I thought, what the hell are you doing? Even when I got to mile 40, that was one of the biggest ones I remember, because I was like, people would still be really impressed if you ran 40 miles. And I was tempted to say it out loud at that moment. But if I had said it out loud at the moment, I think the problem is that I would have never finished the race. So now, thinking back to how that relates to the example with feeling burnt out, during that time where I started feeling really burnt out, I noticed that one of the things that had happened is one of those days, after a particularly tough day of this manager saying that I looked tired and that I looked like I was not well rested and I looked burnt out, and I had just a terrible day on top of that, I came home and I told my wife, I'm feeling burnt out. And after I let the words escape from my mouth, I started letting them escape more freely, more frequently. And I believe that when you speak it out loud, that's the exact moment that the words take root. So step number one, build patient endurance for whatever it is that you're looking to achieve. And if you're feeling burnt out, then perhaps you took on too much too soon and you haven't built up that muscle yet. Number two, your brain likes to save energy, and it will resort to the frame with the lowest energy expenditure that you will allow it. So make sure to be cognitively aware of the thoughts that are going into your head. Take captive every single thought. Number three, negative words, when spoken out loud, become rooted. So that's my take on burnout. Hopefully that was helpful.